Blessings, good evening. Today we have some questions have come in, so it's a time to answer them. The first question, Dear Luang Por, how do I deal with my apparently untrainable mind? Well, the Buddha had great confidence in us as his students, so he thought we could train our minds. But the very doubt that you can't practice what the Buddha taught is one of the initial obstacles that you have to deal with and encounter, which is normal. Before you've done anything, you're going to have doubts. Can I do it? Will I succeed? What do I need to do? So traditionally they say the best place to start practice is find a teacher, Kalyana Mitta. Somebody who knows, at least knows more than you about what the Buddha taught and how to put it into practice. The better the teacher, generally speaking, the better your progress will be. But you need Kalyana Mitta, somebody to explain the Dhamma and the Dhamma of the practice, what happens, what to do, what obstacles you will encounter and how to deal with them, giving you good advice. There are more indirect kinds of Kalyana Mitta, so obviously reading, listening to teachings from people you've never met, say online, can help. But also having a living teacher is ideal, because they can get to know you and point out where you need to change, improve, where you're going wrong, if you are going wrong, and so on. A good framework for study, I would say, I always find, is the teaching we call the Patim Moka, that you'll find in the Dhammapada and other Buddhist commentaries. And it's very succinct, but gives you a good guideline of what you have to do. So you abandon the unwholesome, which is often equated with the practice of sila in Buddhism, keeping precepts, whether you're monastic or laity, 5 precepts, 8 precepts. If you're a monastic, or the Patim Moka sila, the Vinaya. Committing to and adhering to, keeping to precepts train you to restrain, compose your behavior, and help you abandon the worst kinds of characteristics in our behavior. It's the first kind of training, the most important initial kind of training. It would be impossible for you to develop more refined awareness and understanding if you haven't got the basics right. So the whole practice is centered on the practice of non-harming. Say, the Patim Moka just summarizes that. And then cultivating the mind through meditation, both learning to calm the mind and through developing mindfulness, clear comprehension, and then developing insight. This is the second part of that teaching, cultivating the wholesome. So abandoning the unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome. So that's why we talk a lot about cultivating mindfulness and clear comprehension in every posture, in daily life, in meditation. Then the last part of that summary of the teaching is purifying your mind. Purify your mind from the mental defilements. To uproot the mental defilements, we need to develop insight, wisdom, that sees them as impermanent, unsatisfactory, cause of suffering, and not self. And the reason we can train and develop ourselves is because there's nothing that is fixed in our view, in our understanding, in the way the mind works. We can train this mind and we can abandon greed, anger and delusion. So there's always hope, there's always a way forward, but we have to listen to the Dhamma and reflect on it maybe quite often, so that we are turning our actions into skillful actions that will help train this mind and train our body, speech and mind. What did the Buddha say in that same verse, or that same teaching? Patience is the supreme destroyer of defilement. So, patient effort over and over again. Patience means being willing to put time and effort into your practice, even if your mind is not initially very responsive, it's very stubborn, various cravings and attachments come up all the time and it seems hopeless. Be patient with the obstacles and keep going. And try and learn from your experience. Take everything, the good and the bad, as a place of learning. Then you don't, if you're genuinely learning, you don't keep repeating the same mistakes. Gradually you become you have more understanding of what is the path that leads to the end of attachment, what is the path of what is not the path that leads to more attachment, more suffering. You'll get clearer and have a better understanding through the practice of that. Then doubts drop away and the practice probably gets a bit easier over time. If you put in that patient effort, things get easier. So if you read or hear the teachings of any enlightened master from the Buddha downwards, they're always going to tell you about problems they've been through. Everybody has problems, obstacles, that's entirely normal. But the enlightened masters are people who worked through their problems and obstacles, got beyond them, and did train their mind. That's something to keep bearing in mind. Everyone can do it. But you have to apply the teachings, keep working at it with patient effort. And one of the reasons our teacher Ajahn Chah is so popular maybe is because he was good at explaining how he overcame the obstacles such as his untamed mind and whatever came up during the course of his practice and training. He's quite good at pointing out what the obstacles were, how he overcame them, and he's quite creative. But there are certain themes that come out in his teachings, and this sort of continuous patient effort with the practice, keep working at it. One of the similes he used in northeast Thailand, the farmers, they're rice farmers, but in the rainy season, as the rice plants are growing, the fields become flooded with water, and they catch fish from the fields, freshwater fish, for food. And one of the ways they do it, they have a big, large net that they throw over a field or that is filled with water, and they gradually pull the net inwards to the owner of the net from different sides, different corners of the field, and generally square or rectangular in shape. And they're bringing this net in and catching fish as they do that. But it takes time, and a lot of the work is just feeling underwater, pulling the net towards you, not actually seeing what's going on because the water is muddy. There's a lot of feeling, but with a general aim to bring the net in and catch fish. So Ajahn Chah compared that to the practice. You know there's fish in the water, you know it's possible to train this mind to develop peace, insight. But a lot of the practice you do is kind of fumbling around under the water, in the mud. And you have to really feel your way until you get good at it, and then you just know instinctively what you should do, where you should pull the net, how to bring it in. So if you keep practicing, then the ability to train the mind, you'll get better at it and understand how to do it more effectively. The only real way to do it is practice. Do the practice, and then wisdom and understanding will arise. Another question. Luang Por, I have to work with older people who are not always so well behaved. How do you recommend I should practice with this? I guess it's the more universal reflection. Everybody gets old. When you're working with older people and you're younger, even a young person will get old. So we all have to face old age, or the aging of the body. So it is an interesting and, I'd say, essential thing to investigate and understand the effect of aging, an aging body, how that affects the mind, how it affects your life. And then, of course, working with other people who are aging, how does that affect you personally, and also how to do it well for their benefit, I guess. And it's a lot of observation, I would have thought. When you're working with older people, you're observing how their body is getting weaker, fragile, more aches and pains, more suffering in the body, and then that often affects their mind, doesn't it? They become irritated, angry, forgetful. Maybe they have extreme emotions come up sometimes out of the blue and they don't know how to deal with them, perhaps. Depends on the person, obviously, but if you're constantly around older people, well, there'll probably be a mix, won't there? There'll be some people who are more composed together, even if they have illness, they deal with it better mentally. And then there'll be other people who maybe mentally they're very not together, not very mindful, not very aware, struggling perhaps. And so if you're working with these different groups of people, you're going to have to adjust a bit from person to person and need a lot of patience, compassion, forgiveness. And I'd say maybe don't take it too personally when people display their anger or their suffering in different ways through their speech or their behavior. Don't take that too personally. It's not necessarily that they're taking it out on you personally. It's just you're there witnessing it and maybe get pulled into their suffering. But try to reflect, this is their suffering, so you bring up compassion. But it's not your suffering, but you can learn from it, can't you? As you help older people, you're learning, well, when I get older, I may have to face some of these issues, these problems. What can I learn from this? So you're preparing yourself mentally for your own old age, perhaps, or the aging process, how it's going to affect you. Maybe you can learn some important lessons, how people, if they're not careful, they can become very unhappy in their old age. Forgetful, not mobile, things are not convenient, so then many people become irritable, grumpy. So warn yourself of that possibility, see what you can do not to become like that. Make your plan not to be a grumpy old person. So lots of patience, loving kindness, compassion, and the hardest one, equanimity. Because if you're dealing with older people, some of them may die when you're around, or you meet them and then they die. Some get very sick or sicker. So you're going to need a lot of equanimity to accept this is just the normal process of a human life, isn't it? And reflect on that. Human beings do get old, do get sick, they do die. All of us. So it's very universal. And anything you can do to help them, well, that's a great kindness. And just to reflect, this is the nature of the human condition, so you're preparing yourself mentally for your own life, how you will also age, get sick, and one day die. Everyone you love, you may not work, we're not talking necessarily about people you work with, but people you know or related to, family, friends, they also will get old, get sick and die. So mentally you have to adjust to that truth and see the value of reflecting on the impermanence of life, so it helps you to be less detached, and you may have more emotional balance as you face these things in your own life and in the life of people around you. So I'd say you can learn a lot and spiritually grow a lot from working with older people, but it can be, I'm sure it can be challenging, and you need a lot of love and patience, and you have to know how to look after yourself, because you're probably giving a lot of physical and mental energy doing it. So meditation might help. Next question. Dear Luang Por, thank you for the teachings. What does it mean by letting go? Do we need to get our views right before we can successfully let go? Thank you. Yes, I would say you do, don't you? I mean, this is a huge part of, or the central part of our practice is developing right view, looking at our experience correctly from the point of view using, say, the Four Noble Truths, helps us to develop right view, reflect on what is suffering, what is the cause, and the cause is to be abandoned. Craving, ignorance, conditioning, craving and attachment is to be abandoned. The cessation of suffering, so the first thing is to realize that suffering can be overcome, it can cease, and to realize that. That's your goal. The Fourth Noble Truth is the path of practice that leads to the end of suffering. So you can use the Four Noble Truths as a way to develop right view. And in the beginning it's more just thinking about them, noting them, contemplating them, but the idea is through putting the practice into effect, developing this path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the Noble Eightfold Path, you're developing what we call super mundane right view, or Lokuttara right view. Transcendental right view, the actual right view of insight that sees a defilement as a cause of suffering and to be abandoned, to the point where it's just fast and automatic. You just know anger, greed, attachment leads to suffering, therefore you drop it. As soon as it arises, you drop it. That would be your goal, the goal of letting go. But of course, you don't start like that. You start from a place of guessing and trying to work things out and testing and experimenting and making mistakes. Even in practice you make mistakes, and maybe you let go of the good stuff sometimes and keep hold of the bad stuff. So we have this simile of the practice is going on a raft. The raft is your practice of Dhamma, the Noble Eightfold Path, takes you across the ocean. You let go of the raft too quickly, you drown, you struggle and drown. So don't let go of the path too quickly. So we do need the teachings. We can't do away with teachings too quickly. Listening to the Dhamma, reading the Dhamma. We do need precepts. We do need useful techniques for training the mind, meditation objects, and then ways to develop insight. Vipassana meditation, contemplating impermanence, and so on. So that our letting go becomes effective for uprooting defilement. So in the beginning, you need to hold on to things. Don't let go of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha too quickly, or the teachings or the precept too quickly, or the meditation technique too quickly. So letting go is a skill that comes through wisdom and experience gained in the practice. One good thing I always found helpful was like when you meditate. So when I was first taught meditation, I was taught to use the word Buddha, recite this, to bring up mindfulness, to keep the mind in one place and develop strong samadhi and calm. And they always say, well, when your mind becomes calm, mindfulness is continuous. Let go of the word Buddha. It becomes too coarse for the mind, and you just pick up the awareness that arises from reciting Buddha and letting go of all the other things. But what I used to do, and what many people will do, is they drop Buddha too quickly because they're keen to develop samadhi, to know the Dhamma, to be peaceful. And they've been taught that at some point they're going to drop this word Buddha, let go of Buddha, and just stay with the quality of knowing. So people love to drop Buddha too quickly before they've really overcome the hindrances and the distractions and the sleepiness and the worries and all the things that normally fill our mind. They drop the Buddha or the recitation of the word too quickly, and then they're kind of lost. And they say, well, now I'm just knowing my experience, And some people will say, oh yes, I know everything arising and ceasing. I'm practicing Vipassana all day long. And I'm not convinced that's really true for most people. Obviously there might be one or two individuals, but most people, they're still thinking a lot. They need to train more in basic mindfulness, awareness, and developing insight. So this desire for results, for success in the practice, often leads us to drop fundamental, important, basic practices. Same with the precepts. Sometimes people say, oh, I know how to meditate, these precepts are just for kids. So they drop the precepts very quickly and then end up in trouble. So letting go is a skill, and you have to know when to hold on and when to put aside, let go, the different aspects of the practice. But Ajahn Chah's kind of basic instruction is where there's suffering, there's something there that you need to let go of. Obviously an arahant, someone who's attained nibbana, isn't suffering in their experience. And physically they may still have painful feelings because they live in the world, but mentally they have no more suffering because they let go all the time. They have let go of all their defilements, and they've done that well, or perfectly you might say. So if somebody is still suffering mentally, agitated, not at ease in one way or another, then there's still attachment there, then still more letting go to do. So Ajahn Chah used to say, well, it's not sure. If you feel you've let go and your mind is peaceful, okay, good, but it's not sure, so always be on your guard. A wise person is always heedful on their guard because there may still be something you haven't let go of and you don't realize because nothing's triggered this particular attachment that you think you've let go of. So there's the quite often quoted story of the monk who thought he was enlightened and let go of everything. He's kind of jumping the gun, overestimating himself. He went off into the forest, and his teacher knew that this monk wasn't enlightened, his student wasn't enlightened. So his teacher had to find a way to help him. So the monk is meditating in the forest thinking, I'm enjoying the fruits of my enlightenment, I'm peaceful, it's all good. And then suddenly a huge bull elephant with big tusks comes charging through the forest. And as the elephant charges up to the monk, fear arose. Oh, elephant is coming, maybe some panic. His mind started to move and generate different kinds of suffering in that moment. And then he knew, because he was very advanced in his practice, it wasn't that he was a complete beginner. He was very, very advanced, very mindful, already wise to a certain level, but he just missed something. But because he was very wise, he realized, I still have attachment. There's some fear has arisen. I'm still attached to this body, fear of danger. This arose, and he realized he was attached. And then also because he's very sharp and very wise, he knew this is my teacher's doing. My teacher has done this in somehow or other. He's sent this elephant here to teach me. He even worked that out. And at that moment, the elephant disappeared. And it was a mind-made elephant coming from his teacher. So letting go is a bit like that. You may think you've let go of something, but when the conditions are right, maybe it re-arises. Greed, lust, anger, fear, worry, some kind of attachment may still be there and you don't know about it. So never be complacent. It's not sure. Next question. Dear Luang Por, when experiencing unsatisfactory feeling, how different is an arahant's awareness when comparing to a layperson? Thank you. Unsatisfactory feeling, I assume you mean painful, unpleasant feeling, what we call dukkha vedana. So you can feel pleasure and pain with the body, or what we call neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, neutral feeling with the body. And then also you can feel pleasant feeling with the mind, unpleasant feelings accompanying mental states as well. So an arahant, when experiencing an unsatisfactory, as you say, or probably meaning unpleasant or painful feeling, it's only going to be on the level of the body, in the sense they've now freed their mind from suffering, and so there's no mental defilements arising. So their mind is always going to be happy, peaceful, wholesome. So that's one advantage for an arahant. But they still have to deal with painful bodily feelings, because they get old and they've got a body. So the important thing is, how do they mentally perceive and deal with painful feeling? And because their practice is perfected, of the path is perfected, no mental defilements are stimulated by the painful feeling. They still need great endurance and patience maybe to deal with that feeling, but they don't create any mental suffering, any sense of self out of the feeling. They don't go to negativity or aversion because of this painful feeling. That's why they still need a lot of patience though, because unpleasant feeling is unpleasant. It's difficult to be with. Even if you're an arahant, it still hurts. So that's one of the reasons people who are close to Ajahn Chah were very impressed that he lasted in his state of illness for about 10 years, undergoing a lot of painful feelings. He really had to put up with a lot. And the doctors always said this is very unusual. Most patients probably would have died a lot earlier in their experience of their illness. All the things that went wrong with Ajahn Chah's body brought him a lot of pain and discomfort, and yet he managed. But he wasn't creating mental suffering out of the painful feelings. So one thing that an arahant, or maybe not an arahant, maybe a well-developed practitioner who has samadhi, one thing they have to help is obviously the practice of mindfulness and states of samadhi. This is one reason why the Buddha encouraged us to develop states of jhana, samadhi, because you get a rest from painful feeling when you enter a state of deep samadhi, don't you? So you don't have to be an arahant to attain a state of deep samadhi, but what it does is give you a rest from the pain of the body. The shock though, the problem though, is when you come out of that state of calm, peace, where you let go of the body, you start to feel the pain and the discomfort again. And if you're not practicing developing insight to see this pain as impermanent and not self, well, defilements will be triggered again if you're not an arahant. But an arahant will just have to go with patience and endurance during the time they come out of their deep samadhi and are dealing with the pain of a unpleasant body, injury, illness, aging, and so on. So it's difficult for somebody to constantly go into states of samadhi, because you can't go into deep jhana or deep samadhi when you're eating, when you're moving around, when you're doing things. You have to wait until you're still, and then you can go into a deep state of samadhi to escape painful feeling. So even an arahant will still have to face pain. It's just it won't be a cause for suffering, mental suffering. So even the Buddha had painful feelings, we believe, but he didn't suffer with that pain. Dear Lumpur, may you be well. Thank you. If the 5 khandhas are activities of the mind, is awareness of the deepest activities of the mind, or what people to refer to as the one who knows, in the end, even this awareness has to be given up? Thank you. I assume you're asking a question there, that we have to abandon the awareness that is called the one who knows. Well, we say in Buddhism that in the deepest, purest sense, the one who knows, this quality of knowing, is just an element, viññāna dhātu. Just like the body, when you break it down into its component parts, it's made up of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire and water, which are impersonal and not self. The mind is made up of the viññāna dhātu, just the element of knowing, which is also considered impersonal. It's not a person, a being. It's just a quality of knowing. But through defilements of insight, understanding, wrong views, greed, anger and delusion accompany the arising of every moment of consciousness. And this sense of self comes about, and suffering comes about, and with suffering we get birth, aging, sickness and death. So, it's the attachment to the sense of self that forms with consciousness that we're giving up. The delusion of self that feeds craving, desire, wanting, not wanting, that feeds attachment and clinging to the idea of self, the sense of self. That's what you're giving up. But just the quality of knowing, or the one who knows, doesn't have to be given up. It has to be developed and trained. We're training the mind to know itself, but without delusion. As long as there's delusion, we create more attachment, more suffering, more birth, more aging, sickness and death. The whole cycle continues. But if you train the mind to know itself with using the path, mindfulness, clear comprehension, insight, wisdom, you're training the mind to know itself to the point where it can purify itself from these attachments and delusions. Then there's no problem. There's no birth and death, no suffering. This is nibbana. So ultimately, you don't have to give up the awareness of the mind itself, but you have to know it properly, correctly, using the path as your tool, your skill that you develop. This is very much something you have to experience and learn for yourself, know for yourself. The Dhamma is what we call pachatang, pachatang veditabo vinyuhi. So the wise know and experience for themselves. So we can talk about it and the books can describe various things, but words are not really enough. It's very much something to be realized and known for yourself. Maybe that's enough for tonight. So we'll leave it there and wish you well with your practice.